Okay, welcome to the National Housing Resource Center Leaders in Housing Counseling call. We've got a packed agenda today, so we're going to do with several guests. So we're going to try to move pretty quickly through things to get to some of the meat of the matter. I've been traveling. I was at the RCAC National Convention in Salt Lake City the last 2 days. Pretty terrific group of people, and great to see what's going on in the West, and especially with groups that specialize in rural work, which is one of the things that our friends at RCAC have helped us elevate in the work that we're doing. So shout out to them for the good work they're doing. So today's agenda is going to be heavy on things that are happening on Capitol Hill. We're going to talk about the federal funding on housing counseling and NFMC. And we have Alan Jennings from the Community Action Committee of the Lehigh Valley to give us an update of work he's been doing that's very helpful there. And we're going to do another dive into Johnson Crapo with Elizabeth Kemp from NCRC. They've done a lot of work in this area and are on the cusp of some of the controversial issues in Johnson Crapo that will impact the housing community and homeowners and potential homeowners. So all of which should be very good. And we're also going to continue with Elizabeth to talk a little bit about what's going on at FHFA now that Mel Watt is in place. He's made his announcements, so we'll get a summary on that and some discussion. We're going to do probably a very short run-through on HAWC, which just got released, has some interesting aspects to it. We'll do something more in-depth in later calls where we'll have HUD on the line with us. If we have time, we'll do some stuff on CFPB and Treasury escalation lines just to keep people up to date. But we may run out of time, and if not, then please keep in mind, if you haven't already, to join NHRC. Cool. So, Matthew, let's dive in here. So, big news is on HUD housing counseling and NFMC. The House came up with a THEAD subcommittee, came up with their numbers. Where do things stand?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So just by way of a recap, just want to go over, so President Obama's budget had proposed a $17.5 million cut to NFMC funding, but a $15 million increase to HUD housing counseling funding. So those would be funded at, according to President Obama's request, they would be funded at $60 million for HUD housing counseling and $50 million for NFMC funding. So the House THEAD subcommittee this week, not really surprisingly, but they did what we were afraid of, which was they went with the President's requested level funding for HUD housing counseling assistance. So no increase there, but they went with his decrease to NFMC funding, so they would fund it at $50 million. So that would be, if the House numbers would be a net loss of $17.5 million between the two programs. And again, this isn't surprising, and it's certainly not great news. We'd never like to see numbers going down, obviously, but it's important to keep in mind that this is essentially the low water mark for what the counseling will be for both, what the funding will be for both programs. So last year, the House came in well below where we ended up, and we expect that will be the case this year as well. So our goal, one thing also though that's important to keep in mind is that it's unlikely that the Senate's going to come in higher than the President on NFMC funding, which is that $50 million. So that unfortunately is likely to be the number that we see finally. That there's likely to be an agreement with the House, Senate, and the President on that number. So our goals are essentially kind of three goals. One is trying to bring that House number up, which there's still some time to do, and that's what Alan's going to talk about his efforts on that. Then the other goal is getting the Senate to come in as high as possible on on the housing counseling assistance number. And then assuming that there's a gap between the two, the kind of ultimate goal is getting the number as close as possible to the Senate. So I think that's kind of a recap of where we are at the moment. Actually, see, we don't have Alan at the moment, Bruce. So do you want to talk a little bit about the efforts on the House side?
Yeah, why don't you keep an eye out. I just talked to him right before the call, so hopefully there's something hasn't gotten in the way. Right now, I think just to recap where we are, the under the HUD, under the housing, under the House numbers, so TIAD subcommittee, we would be flatlined at 45 million, same as last year, and down to 50 million with NFMC, which would be a net loss for us of 17.5 million for the two combined. So strategy, as Matthew was saying, was get the Senate to go high, and then there'll be a compromise somewhere in the middle. Oh, Alan's in. Okay, so let's let him do the talking. So can you there we go. So Alan, have you, we just recapped where things were at in terms of the House and Senate on the HUD Housing Counseling funding and NFMC. So Alan is the director of the Community Action Committee of Lehigh Valley. Has been a long-time veteran of work on housing issues, on home ownership, on a lot of work around predatory lending. That's kind of how I got to know Alan many years ago, and been a leader on foreclosure counseling, but also is very well connected politically with his congressional relationships. So, Alan, welcome.
Thanks, Bruce. Can you hear me? Are we good?
Yep, you're coming in beautifully. So tell us what you've managed to figure out.
Well, I just did what Bruce asked me to do, which is get my Republican congressman to be willing to introduce an amendment to get the House number back up to the number that the president requested, which I guess is $60 million. And Congressman Dent, who is an old friend of mine, I've worked with him for many years, and he's been very helpful on a number of different matters, including getting the money put back in the budget a couple of years ago.
Absolutely.
So Charlie talked about having to do some kind of an offset. I'm not exactly sure what his plan is for the offset, but I promise I won't let him take anything away from the kinds of things that most of us do and are important to us. But he is prepared to submit an amendment at $60 million, and I need to put some talking points together for him so he's comfortable with the material that he has when he makes when he offers the amendment.
So that would mean bringing the HUD housing counseling funding in the House proposal to $60 million. If he was successful, which would be huge, we're pretty sure the Senate will come in at $60 million, and that would be the figure. So we would have an increase of $15 million in the HUD housing counseling budget. There would be a decrease on the NFMC side, but I think the big news is that HUD housing counseling is the long-term funding. It's the most flexible funding for agencies, and we knew that NFMC is going to disappear over time. It was meant to be a temporary program, so building up HUD housing counseling is the best way to assure steady funding for our future. So this is really a big development.
Well, Charlie is, I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable with this. Charlie is going to, the talking points that I'm giving him are on two of the things that we do a lot of, which is home ownership counseling, pre-purchase counseling, seminars and one-on-one and those kinds of things, as well as foreclosure mitigation work. And that's the stuff that he's going to tout, from his district and why this is something that's important to him and so on. So I hope everybody's okay with that.
I think we're definitely, I think that's right on target. It's worth, well, so I mean, there's some talk about that programs that work for rural populations. How rural is Lehigh? Is his district?
Well, he has a new district that was gerrymandered. It's the ugliest damn thing that goes this kind of sliver from the Lehigh Valley out toward Harrisburg, and it used to be. I used to characterize this region as the cities of Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton, their suburbs, and the soon-to-be suburbs, because it's such a sprawling area. There's not a whole lot of really rural area in this. In the old Charlie Dent district. The new Charlie Dent district has a lot more rural, but it's in areas that I don't have any familiarity with and don't cover. So, I'm not the guy to speak to the rural issues with Charlie.
Well, so I just think the sentence is that HUD is doing a whole new emphasis on rural. We're going to in the tracking numbers for 9902, they're going to collect data on rural areas. So this will, we think, mean that there's going to be some more emphasis on an area that's valuable to him and his district. So, I mean, I think, putting in a mention that there'll be some emphasis on rural might be helpful to him and some of the other people on the THUD subcommittee.
Yeah, I don't know how much kind of activity he's got in those rural areas of that district, though. So I don't know,
Right.
Okay. What kind of nonprofits are doing that work there. So I'm just not going to be able to be real helpful on that level. So somebody else will have to do that.
And what's your sense of why Charlie Dent is doing this? Because he's kind of sticking his neck out in a world where Republicans are not calling for increased funding for programs.
Well, I think it's a combination of things. First of all, and you can't overstate this. Some of it is just a long-term relationship. Charlie and I have been friends and colleagues on a lot of different things over the years. My kids babysat his kids. I mean, all that kind of stuff. So part of it is the personal relationship. More importantly, though, is the constituent service aspect of it. Anybody that calls the congressman's office, anybody that calls the congressman's office looking for foreclosure mitigation assistance, they get sent to us, and they know they're getting good attention when they get sent to us. So we're able to help him with constituent service in a way that is really valuable. And the people we're talking about are they're not the disenfranchised low income. They're people who actually own a home and therefore are a little bit more likely to vote. But so I think secondly, it's a major motivation is just good old-fashioned constituent service aspect. And then third, Charlie is getting more and more bold about trying to preserve or reignite the old moderate base of the Republican Party. He's very uncomfortable with the Tea Party crowd, as are a lot of members on the Republican side. But Charlie was the guy who really kind of stepped up back during the government shutdown last year and said, this is ridiculous. This is not good for the Republican Party, and he got a huge amount of attention for that. That attention reinforced his desire to do things like this and step over the normal line and do things that are good for his district and good for America, and not necessarily catering to the extreme right.
See, I think this is very valuable to know, and I think we may not all get in a situation where we can be close buddies with these folks and provide babysitting services, but we can do things that will be very valuable to the to Congresspeople who are Republicans, such as inviting them into events, housewarming events, and news events, groundbreakings, things like that. We certainly, it's easy to say, send us your people that need housing help, depending on what your agency specializes in. And then establishing relationships with the staffers and, to the extent you can, to the congressman, especially when there's media events. Those things are really big, and we'll find more people that have a different view of the world or political ambitions, and maybe some sense of mission. Some of this, I think, is also you're good at talking about things from the perspective that Charlie Dent has, and that's and so these ideas of self-sufficiency, independence, building your own wealth because you worked hard, and protecting it, those kind of things appeal to people a lot too.
Yeah, a lot of the things that we do can be seen and should be seen as Republican, meeting Republican values, like trying to gain assets and trying to, be self-sufficient. Those are all good things that they get. I've actually got Charlie. We're working on looking at wealth disparity in our community between white and minority households, and I've actually got Charlie agreeing to do a congressional forum in our market, in our district. Wow. On wealth disparity. He's going to have basically his own little hearing on wealth disparity, which is, not the kind of turf that you find a lot of Republicans on. But Charlie's the kind of guy that'll look at that. Part of that, too, is because, you know, even though our politics are pretty progressive and we're pretty outspoken, we also have very good relationships with you know, with his constituents, business leaders that are donors and so on. Another thing that I don't think we do enough of is that when somebody does something like this for us, we need to acknowledge them and we need to give them credit for it. A lot of us are, you know, pretty much activist Democrats, and you know, we're loath to, you know, to giving a Republican credit for doing the right thing, but we make that decision at our own peril. If you go to our website and look at our blog, I did a blog post a couple of weeks ago that was pretty complimentary of Charlie. I haven't gotten too much kickback from my friends on the Democratic side about it, but it's the kind of thing that Charlie was really happy about, and it reinforces the relationship and makes sure that the next time I go to him, he's going to be, you know, receptive again.
So, and along those same lines, there was a Hope Now roundtable in Philadelphia put together by the Fed. I went to it. I was invited. They had Vince from Charlie Dent's office there. He's I think the director of constituency services. And so after he introduced himself to the group, I said, well, Charlie Dent, you're being too modest. You helped save our HUD housing counseling funding after it was zeroed out. That was such a high impact thing that Charlie Dent personally called me up the next day to say he appreciated the recognition. I think
cool.
This recognition thing is you're really right on, and we ought to figure out maybe some more formal thing to do as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's great. This is very, very helpful, and a big thanks from all of us. So we'll be following this closely, and if there are things we can do to support the effort, we'll try to figure them out. We'll work on this offsets question. I've got some feelers out. We'll see what we can come up with.
Thanks.
All right. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Really, thanks a lot, Alan.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Second that, thanks, Alan, and just say if anybody on the phone is buddies with Chairman Latham in Iowa, we'll be in good shape.
That's right. Get your baby.
We did get Charlie to go to Latham 2 years ago. That's how we ended up pulling off that that recovery of that money. So.
Well, I assume that he's talking to Latham this time because there's no point in doing an amendment unless Latham's on, you know, either neutral or on board.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Charlie's thought that all through. Good. Well, again, big thanks from all of us. This is very valuable.
Happy to help.
Breakthrough. Okay, good. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, which is we spent some time in previous calls about Johnson-Crapo, the legislation to change the housing finance structure and replace Fannie and Freddie with a new structure. Matthew, do you want to give us a quick update of what's happened recently, and then we'll pivot to Elizabeth Kemp from NCRC.
Yeah, so just the kind of overview of where things stand. So I think we've talked a good bit about what's in the bill, and I think Elizabeth will also get into that a lot. So just kind of procedurally, so there right now the bill needs 12 votes to get out of committee. It has either 12 or 13 votes. So the Johnson and Crapo plus the 10 original co-sponsors of Corker Warner, and then they may have one other. But the speculation has been that Majority Leader Reid won't bring it to the floor unless it gets a stronger showing of support at the committee level. They had pushed back the markup originally. They were trying to see if they can make some changes that would bring on some additional votes without losing any, and they were especially trying to get votes from the 6, a lot of people have been calling them progressive Democrats. They're not, I don't know that they're all progressive, but 6 uncommitted Democrats.
The gang of 6. They're the gang of 6.
So the big development was last week the 6 kind of announced as a block that they wouldn't support the bill without pretty substantial changes. That essentially made it look like Johnson-Crapo was torpedoed. It's slated to come up for a vote today. I don't think they voted on it yet, but Elizabeth may have news on that. But the thinking is that there's not going to be the substantial amendments that a lot of people are looking for. Probably gets out of committee, but it looks unlikely that it gets to the Senate floor for a vote. So I'll just kind of leave it there and now turn it over to Bruce and Elizabeth for more discussion.
Great. Well, I think people all know the role that NCRC has played on lots of the major housing issues in this country, especially around community reinvestment and access to credit issues. Elizabeth Kemp is their legislative and policy analyst who's been really focusing on this, and NCRC's had a large campaign around the sort of some of the big questions around Johnson-Crapo. So, Elizabeth, do you want to give us a quick sense of where NCRC sees things, and why don't you give us what your view of the Johnson-Crapo is at this moment?
Sure, no problem. I just assume kind of start with some of the administrative updates, and then if there are questions about the more substantive components of the bill, I'm happy to answer those as well. We can stick to the slide. So just to kind of give you some context for like what this vote is and why this really matters, especially as we talk about some of the political strategy moving forward, is if you go to the next slide, you know, you look at some of the assumptions and the premises that are sort of feeding the infrastructure of this bill, and there's a lot of talk about safety and soundness and protecting taxpayers, but there's also kind of a more sinister foundation that is essentially that affordable housing programs, not just the goals, but Community Reinvestment Act, essentially any federal program or law that targets lending to low and moderate income communities or some of those communities that have been traditionally underserved was a major trigger for the financial crisis. So it's really been community groups like housing counselors and like NCRC that kind of have been busting that myth and really holding people accountable for propagating it. It also kind of demonstrates a real insufficient understanding of just how important those programs are for developing people as homeowners and getting them into the middle class, giving them opportunities for wealth creation. And politically, which is really what I'm talking about today, is this bill ultimately kind of sets the high water mark for what we expect to be the legislation, if any, moving forward. Basically, if it's not in the bill now, it's not going to be, and we can expect that a lot of the things that are really important, especially when it comes to access to credit issues, fairness issues, are really only going to get chipped away at even more. So that's kind of what we're looking at now that today is over. I think if you can go to the next slide. Today, I just got out of a cab. Actually, the vote is done. They wrapped that this morning. It was a pretty efficient process. The vote came out actually 13-9. The traditional, like you had the Corker-Warner co-sponsors all supporting it, and your kind of unknown vote was Tom Coburn from Oklahoma. He ended up supporting the bill. What you will see is that after many weeks of negotiating amendment language, is that the package of amendments that made it in are mostly infrastructure-based. A lot of the amendments that actually have real enforceability or are pushing for more enforcement and more like stronger access provisions just didn't make it in. The only real components that speak to those are some of the amendments that clarify to some degree what exactly the obligation of FMIC is or its mission is as far as preserving the 30-year mortgage or providing access, but there's no real commitment to specifically targeting underserved markets. So there are real deficiencies still, even after the amendment process, and I think that's one of the reasons that you see, like was just brought up, that's one of the reasons that the sort of gang of six, if you want to call them that, decided to sort of band together and effectively walk away from this bill. Negotiations just weren't coming through for some of those components, and I think some of those senators know that for a lot of their constituents that some of those issues are deal breakers.
Let me just jump in. I mean, we had 3 amendments around that were being sponsored that were specific to what we were pushing as an NHRC in our groups, and those were around the down payment, the minimum down payment requirements, getting exemption for housing counseling, dealing with the qualified mortgage component, so that 43% total debt cap that comes with a qualified mortgage, trying to get an exemption for that, and then a bunch of changes that would integrate housing counseling much more into the system. And I take it all 3 of those amendments did not make it in. Is that
None
right?
of those are in. No, the amendment that would exclude the DTI cap did not make it in. The amendment, I think it was from Brown, about promoting housing counseling, also is not in. And then I think there was another amendment that includes or would include housing counseling as sort of a contributing factor in underwriting as a way to either decrease or bypass down payment requirements, or one of the other QM factors that also was not included. So that's kind of what I'm getting to, that there are just some real deficits in this bill as far as what people were willing to compromise on, what they were willing to agree on. As far as steps moving forward,
Let me just ask you quickly before we move on to that step. So, okay, so now it gets voted out of committee. It does get out of committee, even though it didn't get the number of votes. So what happens next for this specific bill?
For this specific bill, Harry Reid has been pretty clear that in order to bring this to a floor vote, he wanted a strong majority. And strong majority, I think, in his mind is something closer to like 16 votes. And he certainly wanted the backing of the senators, I think, like Warren, Brown, Merkley, to really guarantee that there would be sufficient bipartisan support to actually move this out of the Senate if need be. And it appeared like with a 13-9 vote, it's really unlikely that absent some extraordinary pressure that this will see a floor vote.
And it was more Republicans than Democrats, right? The 7-6.
The holdouts, actually, there's that group of 6 Democrats, but there are actually a few Republicans as well. Toomey and Shelby opposed it. Also Vitter. But I mean, they're opposing it for very different reasons. Their opposition stems more from like questions about the actual nature of the role of government in the housing finance market,
Which will be a fundamental issue in the House as well.
right?
So let's pivot to this big question about what are the next steps.
Well, so because this bill is sort of unlikely to move on. I mean, even if it did get a vote, even if it did advance to the House, there's no, I don't have any intelligence for you about who would be selected or to kind of pitch a companion bill in the House. They're already dealing with Jeb Hensarling's PATH Act, and Maxine Waters recently released her proposal as well. It's unlikely to pass the Senate. It's definitely unlikely to get through the House. So the real issue becomes long-term. It's kind of not a dead issue, but politically it becomes something that is much more kind of off the radar until probably 2015. In the meantime, I think you'll see a little more momentum growing around some making some patches and corrections to the infrastructure we currently have in place, and then some additional proposals that are maybe a little, that maybe take some of the amendment language, for example, the housing counseling amendments, and try to integrate those into an alternative proposal. I know that's starting to be a topic of conversation, especially among the 6 Democrat holdouts, is that maybe we just need to go back to the drawing board altogether.
I mean, I think one thing that we should think about as a community is the possibility that there is such a deadlock on this issue, and such, even 2015 after the midterm elections, that maybe that something has to be done. That maybe the solution is going to be that Fannie and Freddie get reconfigured in some form, but remain as the vehicle for doing this. And you can still have a common securitization platform that FHFA is doing right now, and so there are things that FHA is doing that do make the process a little bit more efficient, but I mean, collectively, because of the gridlock and something needs to be done, you can't run this as you're doing it right now. That maybe Fannie and Freddie get fine-tuned. And we all know they had many problems, but that might be another path that might happen from all this, and we should start thinking about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll see a growing sentiment across a pretty diverse spectrum of interests, consumer groups included, that we need to start looking at the infrastructure we have and sort of seeing what tweaks we can make. And actually, if you're interested in talking about sort of the direction that Mel Watt is taking the FHFA, I think that is sort of the real step. This is sort of the reform that we're going to be seeing, like concrete reform that we're going to be seeing over the next couple of years. If there's no legislative reform now, Director Watt is stepping up and actually saying, okay, we have some options that we can start implementing over, at FHFA through regulation. So he delivered his first major public address this week, May 13th, to kind of outline what his plans are for the future. And I would say one of the broad themes of that is to let Congress handle the comprehensive reform, and that FHFA will proceed sort of cautiously and conservatively. And I say conservatively not as a political term, but purely as a like baby step kind of process. But that he will be looking very closely at the statute that actually created FHFA to determine the scope and the scope of powers that he has, that FHFA has, to make some corrections moving forward. And he laid out some priorities for what he'd like to do in the short term to continue to sort of solve problems that still exist as a result of the financial crisis, and also make some changes that he hopes will provide some liquidity in the credit market moving forward. So one of those steps is definitely going to be to clear up some of the conditions that would trigger required buybacks of loans. That's one of the issues that lenders and industry people keep raising over and over again, is that we don't know what those buyback rules are. We don't know what the reps and warranties are. We don't want to step back in until we have certainty about what our obligations and what our risks are. So
let me just jump in on that, just because this is a big issue, but I don't know that everybody's that familiar with it. So one of the recent things that Fannie and Freddie have been doing has been to require that lenders buy back loans that Fannie and Freddie say were not underwritten according to the appropriate standards. They did not follow the manual on this, and and lenders their view is, well, they sold the loan to Fannie Freddie, and they want to go out and make new loans, and now we'll have to buy them back. That's relatively expensive for them. So that they've made this a major issue in why there's a lack of availability of credit, because they believe that only the narrowest interpretation of Fannie Freddie rules are what rules. Now, I'm not sure that's the case. I'm just saying that that's the argument that's out there. And both FHA and FHFA have made efforts to kind of narrow down the gray area some, so that it's less, it's more predictable when there would be buybacks. I think the lenders were really shocked when Fannie and Freddie said you need to buy back large numbers of loans, and then they contested it in court. It went back and forth, and largely it appears that FHFA won on those cases.
Mm-hmm. And to kind of dovetail with the buyback provisions, Watt also is planning to clear up the underwriting criteria for the GSEs. Lenders have been making a related claim that, it's not clear exactly what the down payment requirements are, what the credit requirement scores are, and so the business plan then is to kind of not even come close to the edge of those boundaries, but stay well within. And so the theory, Watt's theory being that if he makes it clear what exactly those parameters are, that it should expand opportunities for credit a little bit, and lenders will feel more comfortable walking up to that line in terms of the bright line requirements. Some of the other things, loan limits. Right now, FHFA imposes loan limits. They're only willing to guarantee loans up to a certain dollar amount. There was talk in recent months that maybe the FHFA would reduce those loan limits to something closer to, $400-some thousand. That same idea is actually in the Johnson-Crapo bill. Watt has said pretty explicitly that it will not use the FHFA authority to reduce the GSE loan limits for right now, and the idea there being they just don't want to disrupt. This is going to be a baby step process, right? Change little variables, as we go, so the market doesn't suffer too much disruption.
And that's important to us in high-priced markets, where in a Boston or a Bay Area, where you need to have that greater that higher price limit.
Right. And then some of the more kind of remedial things, he is going to launch a foreclosure prevention pilot program in Detroit. And this will be like a neighborhood stabilization project, reaching out to homeowners who are distressed, using money to eliminate dilapidated properties that are dragging down home values. They're just going to kind of see what works and what doesn't. But they'll be partnering there on the ground with nonprofits that are already sort of working in that space and trying to revitalize communities. There was a briefing call about this program the same day of the speech, and I think the question was very fair. The question was asked, and it's entirely fair, that this is a program that we needed yesterday, and we needed it not just in Detroit but all over the country. And so right now it's focused in Detroit, but I think if that proves successful, or there's a lot of positive reception, that they are willing to very slowly, very cautiously, again, expand it and start looking for partners in other locations around the country. And sort of related to that, there was also some talk about restructuring HARP or redefining who is eligible for the money. HARP is the Home Affordable Refinance Program. rather than redefining who will be eligible, Watt is going to sort of assess or adjust their marketing campaign to reach those distressed homeowners who are eligible under the original definition, but so far have not taken advantage of the benefits. And then, as we touched on a little bit earlier, there's still going to be that push to continue on with developing the common securitization platform. So right now, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have two separate platforms and two separate security instruments. What Ed DeMarco implemented about a couple of years ago now was a plan to streamline the two entities to make operating through them, securitizing through them, a faster and hopefully less costly process. The idea being that in the end, hopefully consumers, borrowers actually see some savings there. So that plan will continue on.
And we've been involved in that conversation. I mean, this has actually been, we think this is good news.
Yeah.
I don't know what NCRC's view of it is, but I think in general it means that there'll be common rules for servicing and, for example, the pooling and servicing agreements, where some of them said you couldn't do principal reductions, and others said there'd be a cap on how much interest rate reductions could be done, and all these things, all that stuff could be eliminated. There'd be one standard rule, and we're arguing that all the tools for resolutions should be available to every borrower. And the streamlining of the mortgage application is part of the process as well, creating a standard mortgage database, all those things kind of come together, which, is one part of what the financial reform will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think some of the servicing components I think you'll see haven't been fully developed yet. I think the goal is, just as you said, to streamline all of those materials and processes. But that will be, I think they're focusing for right now the securitization platform on sort of the front end. And then the servicing components of it are still being worked out.
Right. So Matthew, you were going to say something?
Well, we just have a couple questions I was going to jump in with.
Oh, yeah.
Just kind of doubling back to a couple things. Did they give any idea how long it will take to consider expansion of the Detroit pilot program?
No. That my best guess from everything that is in their strategic plan, from his sort of approach to delivering this information in the speech and then in the briefing call, like I said, it is very much a kind of baby step, proceed with caution kind of attitude that they're taking, even about these changes. I think there's a real fear that too much all at once will cause disruption in an already pretty tight market, and so it's just very slow going.
All right. And then the other question is if you could just quickly go back over the HARP changes.
Yeah. So I guess the change to HARP is that there is no change. There was some, in the months leading up to his speech, there had been some, it had come to light that a lot of the pot of money for HARP had not been distributed yet. And so there was a push to redefine or expand the definition of who would be eligible for HARP or what that money could be used for. And I think FHFA did some kind of research and study into why that money wasn't being distributed. And their conclusion was that rather than expanding who would be eligible for it or what the money could be used for, that rather their sort of marketing and communications efforts about the program had not actually been all that successful. So their strategy is to keep the definitions and the scope of the program what it is, but really ramp up their marketing and outreach to actually reach those people. So I anticipate that would be an opportunity for housing counselors to get more involved in terms of reaching out to the people or counseling the people who are actually eligible for those funds. Because there's just been a disconnect between the fact that the program exists and the people who actually could benefit from the money.
So we had a meeting a couple weeks ago with Mel Watt that talking about many of these issues and what we would like FHFA to do, and it talked about the real need for a broad-based outreach program that reaches the people who have not been tapped into or have been discouraged in multiple languages and multi-layered marketing, and basically they would be guided to counseling and to legal services. And Mel kind of jumped on this and said, well, we're doing this test case with the HARP program, and maybe we should try to figure out how to do something there and then see if expand it to the foreclosure side. So that, I think you're right that this is an opportunity, and I have to figure out how to engage with them more to take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it sounds like something that they are willing to really work with groups on, and I think there is a real desire there to get that pot of money utilized effectively. I guess the only other thing that is really a standout from Watt's speech is the commitment moving forward to things like the affordable housing goals, to reaching underserved markets generally, is he didn't really touch on it in his speech a lot, but in their strategic plan that they released, there's a recognition that it's part of their mission is to serve underserved creditworthy borrowers, but the statements that are in the strategic plan are not real action steps or strategies. It's more just, we'll look at the scope of the mission and look for additional opportunities to reach underserved creditworthy borrowers. And then they do plan to issue another affordable housing goals rulemaking to kick into effect in 2015. I think the current rule expires at the end of 2014. There's a little more commitment in the multifamily sector, but the single family was unfortunately a little soft in terms of what we actually wanted to see.
Let me ask you something. So we thought that the big thing that would be early on in a Mel Watt administration would be principal reduction, but doesn't seem to be any talk about that. What's your sizing up on that?
It's hard to tell. I know that was one of the reasons I think there was a lot of excitement about him being made the director. I think there's been a lot of caution because at the time he assumed the director role, that Corker Warner was still very much on the table. Johnson Crapo were in the midst of negotiating their proposal. And the administration, I think, was very interested in seeing what was going to come out of the Senate Banking Committee. And the administration, I think, has generally been pretty vocally supportive of the Senate's efforts to do comprehensive reform. So my take on it is that I think there was hesitation or some sluggishness to kind of decide what the direction of FHFA was going to be, and some of those changes, until there was more clarity about what comprehensive GSE reform was going to look like. Now that we have a clear idea of what that political landscape is, we may hear more from Watt over the next few months and see some of those plans built out, and things like principal reduction come back as real solutions. Whether or not it's a guaranteed thing, I can't say.
Well, thank you very much. This has been really, really helpful. We appreciate all the good work you're doing, and we will definitely keep this conversation going as things progress. So this has been a very helpful session.
Great, thank you. If you have any
Okay.
questions, I think my email is on one of the slides.
There we go. Great. Okay.
All right,
Thanks a lot.
thank you.
Okay. So we're going to do a quick jump onto HAWC, which there's no way we could do this in the few minutes remaining, and actually HUD had offered to do a briefing on HAWC, but what we did, we jointly decided we shouldn't do it until the rule has been announced because we couldn't get into enough detail. So we'll do a later session on HAWC, but kind of the broad sweep here is that it's been announced, and it's done as a possible rule or as a potential rulemaking, and so there'll be comments due the middle of July 14th, it says right here, and we'll have some ability to evaluate this and help shape it. The goal is that by October 1, that for the next contract year, there'll be a pilot, but a fairly good-sized pilot that really implements HAWC. And HAWC is the first pre-purchase program the government has that where housing counseling, where it's well, I guess it's not the first, but it's for FHA. It really is a kind of thoughtful attempt to build in incentives to get people to go to counseling, to kind of affect behavior in terms of the home buyer, home owner, and also to build in some potential funding for housing counseling agencies. So it sets up a regimen where before somebody makes mortgage application, they need to get education and counseling from a HUD-approved housing counseling agency in order to qualify for the program, and then there'll be there'll be one set of counseling opportunities before they make application, and they map out 6 hours of a combination of counseling and education, an hour and a half of which would have to be face-to-face counseling. And then between the application and the closing, they'll have a separate hour. And part of the thinking, I think Sarah talked about this at the leaders meeting in Los Angeles. While people are trying to buy a house and are at the point of making application, they're very focused on getting the mortgage. But at the point where things have moved further on, then you can talk to them about the more longer-term issues like having a maintenance, setting aside money for maintenance on the property, how to handle taxes, what a budget would look like, how to deal with reserve funds, making sure your taxes are paid, making sure your insurance is up to date, all those sorts of pieces that are very much about the managing of the house. So that between the application and closing, there'd be an hour there, and then the third part would be if they do it a post-closing counseling session, and the incentives would be that you'd get 50 basis points off the mortgage insurance upfront fee, the MIP fee, and if you successfully completed the first phase of the counseling, and you would also get a 10 basis points off the ongoing MIP fee for the life of the loan. And that would be actually phases 1 and 2, so pre-closing and between pre-application and between application and closing. If you do those two successfully, then you'd get the incentives. And then the last phase would be if you come back after closing and to get counseling post-closing, and if you have no 90-day lates, you get another 15 basis points off your MIP or your mortgage insurance rate after, I think it's 24 months. And that would be for the remainder of the life of the loan. So a small incentive to make timely payment and an incentive to get people into the last phase of counseling. They have built-in mechanisms to get housing counseling agencies paid, and it's complicated. I actually, having read it, didn't quite understand it all, so I'm not going to go through it. But they do have some ideas about what minimum payments could look like. It looks like there's a mechanism where the consumer might pay and then get reimbursed by the lender, and for part of it. I mean, they've thought through a bunch of things. It turns out they can't pay for counseling directly to the housing counseling agency, so there needs to be a way to flow it through the servicer to make it work. But they're trying to build in a mechanism that might be effective, and once we learn the ropes, could be replicable in the non-FHA private markets as well.
I'm just going to jump in with one question.
Yes, sure.
And I don't know, you may not have a good answer for this, but the question is whether HUD said how they'll be selecting agencies to participate in the pilot program.
Well, it's a very good question. I don't have a great answer. There are some criteria. I didn't write them all down when I was scanning it, but did mark a few down. So obviously you have to be a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. They want agencies that have previous agreements with FHA-approved lenders. They want to have groups that have diverse, are used to work with a diverse client base, and they want groups that have relations with real estate agents. So there were a number of general criteria. There weren't specific ones. Is there a scoring system, all that sort of thing. You will need to submit a request to be part of the process, part of the pilot. They won't come and ask groups. You'll need to request to be part of it. You know, and I don't know for sure, but I bet part of it will also be that they'll want to try to have a range of groups. So some very large national groups that are call centers, some groups that are maybe national but do specialize in face-to-face. I'm sure there's likely to be an online component, and then I'm sure they'll want some local groups as well. And I bet they're interested in different models. But you know, I'm just saying that from the way I think that HUD thinks about these things, not that I know for sure.
And was your impression that the kind of application to participate in the pilot was the same as the comments, that you're kind of putting your hat in the ring that way, or is there a different process?
Right. You know, it's a separate letter. You would need to submit a letter saying we are interested in, and I don't know when that will come up, but we will certainly post that on the list the minute we hear about it. And my assumption is that would happen after the comment period is closed. But again, that's my talking and not HUD talking.
And then just one other thing that I'll kind of add that has come up in some emails to me. So they do talk a bit about the content, the requirements, but they're also soliciting comments on what counseling should be required, the time that they requirements. So I imagine that that's something a lot of people on the call will be interested in and may want to submit comments on.
I know, it was very interesting to me. It seemed to me like they had not built in components that said that there would absolutely be a review of somebody's credit. And that they would, they talk about having a household budget, but they don't necessarily talk about figuring out affordability. So I don't know if that was intentional or if that was assumed to be fit under those things. And we should think as a community what our view of this is. But I always think, my instinct is to say that if we're doing counseling, we really need to get down deep into people's finances and say, you're ready if you've reached these thresholds, or you're not if you haven't. Some things that really give people the tools to figure out if they're really, if this is the right time for them to be buying a house. So I'll be interested in people's thoughts about that piece of it, because I think it's an important element in the work that we do. Great. Well, you know, I mean, the great thing about our business is there's a lot going on and a lot of things that create opportunity for us. This has been a very useful time. Oops, we're out of time. Okay, so we'll figure out some other way to do the escalation lines. So please think about joining NHRC. We've actually had a rush of memberships. We really appreciate that, and hope other groups continue to join. Just a reminder, if you are a member, you really do need to complete your application on getting the credit report discount. We've got a bunch of applications out there that haven't turned in all the paperwork that the credit bureaus require. So that would be huge to get that going. Thanks. Good call for everybody. It's been a really valuable 2 weeks. We'll reach out to HUD about a deeper conversation about HAWC. So if you've got some thoughts about how we should frame that, just let us know. And we're going to be in touch with you about a lot of things because a lot is happening. Keep up the good work out there. Bye.